Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the last movement, to Schiller's text, and it doesn't really pay respect neither to Beethoven or to Schiller to bring such a short excerpt. Beethoven used the entire symphony, all the movements coming before the last movement, to build up for the human voices coming in the last movement, singing the praise of mankind. And in the text of Schiller, it says, "Alle Menschen werden Brüder." All people becomes like brothers. And "Seid umschlungen Millionen," embrace ye millions. And that is you have the opening, Freude schöner Götterfunken, joy, beautiful godly sparks. So this image from Schiller and Beethoven, I think best gives an idea about the new era of mankind that has been opened up by these initiatives led by China, by Xi Jinping and the other BRICS countries. Namely that this is one humankind, and to collaborate with each other for securing the utmost development of every single individual existing today and to come in the future. The praise of beautiful godly sparks, which is the creativity of man. And this new era is right here. It's being built right now. We have now a choice between two systems, and this system is for the future of mankind. And this is something that really has been the work of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche and this organization. This is our baby. And we had the Old Language report that we published the 1st of January 1997, and we organized hundreds of conferences and meetings, individuals meetings, and with large groups of people all over the world. And now, so many years later, we have, or Phil showed, the new language report, which I'll encourage everyone here to get a copy of, to order a copy of. We are out of copies you can actually get back with you today, I think, but order it and study it, because this is the future of mankind. This is the future of your children and your grandchildren. I want to say also in this, Phil mentioned the petition that the United States has been invited by Xi Jinping to join this new era of mankind. The United States has almost lost its soul. China lost its soul during the Cultural Revolution. It went against Confucius, all the key ideas of China, and they have revived that. And I'll give a pretty concise, I hope, picture of what is happening now from a little different angle. And the United States can do exactly the same thing. One of the things I think is so exciting about this process is how fast it can go, and that it can be done anywhere in the world, because China was very, very poor when they started after the Cultural Revolution, which lasted between 1966 and 1977. And then China began to take off, and I think I'll show that to you here today. So let's take the next. So here we have very happy leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And Helga mentioned it. I mean, it is clearly, this process has been led by China, which I'll show why and how in a second. And Helga mentioned the very crucial how all these funds has been established since the July the 16th this year, just in a very few months. That is credit to be directed towards in-depth infrastructure development. The gentleman from Africa mentioned the question about economy and Ebola. The Premier Li from China went to Africa this year, and he proposed to connect all of Africa's capital with fast-speed rail. This can happen, and this can happen very fast. The key thing is we need to get the United States on board. And therefore, I would like to ask you now, before I go on, to be crazy, go wild. In all your Christmas parties and so forth, where you now go out with a petition and get people to sign. Younger people that are good with the internet, go in and do some research, send this petition out, get it on websites. We have to create an uproar and get US to get its soul back and join the rest of mankind so that this will become a reality. The opposite is confrontation. There's no way that such two systems can exist side by side, and Phil went through, and Helga, the danger of nuclear confrontation. I want to take, can you go back to this picture? Because one of the things too with, apart from what Phil said concerning going after Russia now, is if you look at the map, if you look at from Asia over to Europe, vast majority there is Russia. Russia being rich in minerals and potential. If you take an in-depth development of Russia with infrastructure development, with development corridors and so forth, that is a crucial, the crucial part of the world language. And the financial oligarchy wants to crush that by all means to make sure that this will not function. The key way to get rid of Ebola, to get rid of terrorism, is in-depth economic development. And just yesterday, India and Russia, well, not India, China and Russia were discussing how to develop Afghanistan in depth now that the US troops are pulling out, and you have Taliban coming back, and you have all kind of growth of terrorism possible because people are poor and the whole place is flooded in drugs. Then what do you do? The key thing you do is to engage that country in in-depth development with railroads, with universities, hospitals, and so forth. So let's go on. I want to show number 3. Yes. Just to give people a little picture of, because now I'm going to go through what China has been doing. China and US, apart if you don't count Alaska, are quite similar. If you look at one, this is the elevation of US and China. They're more or less the same size. The only difference is that China has a whole landmass to the west of it. But China's geography is a little bit more rough than the United States. The mountains are much more and they're much taller. Take the next. This is the water situation in the US and in China. China is and that's similar. China is doing gigantic water projects for taking water from the south, where you have a lot of water, up to the north. And you know the gigantic problems we have here in California and east of California and south of California with water problems. US joining the BRICS development perspective will mean we will have good friends to collaborating to green the desert here in the United States and elsewhere in the world. But the situation is, the areas and so forth are similar, so I just wanted to put that into people's mind. Next, here you have a picture of Sun Yat-sen, who was a great admirer of Abraham Lincoln, and who he led the overthrow of the Emperor of China, and he did it with the insight of the American system of political economy. Next. What he designed in 1919 was an international development of China program, in depth, with transport corridors going from China to Europe and into Africa. Here you see his map of railroads in China. His proposal was also peace through economic development, which is what the new era, the very first map I showed you, is a new era of mankind, which we can experience in our lifetime, big style, if we get the United States and Europe to join the BRICS effort now. If we get the new system consolidated, we can once and forever obliterate oligarchism and colonialism in the world. So this is big stakes, and we have never had such a chance before in the history of mankind for once and for all looking upon the world as one mankind and having a proper living standard for every single human being in the world within the next few decades ahead. This is an absolute possibility, and I'll show you in a second why this is the case. So this was his map in 1919, where he said he called upon the world's leaders to adopt his program, because he said after the First World War and the Versailles Treaty, the world was headed towards a Second World War. And he said, unless the world adopt my program, we are going to have a Second World War. We are looking at the same thing. Unless we get the United States to adopt the win-win BRICS New Era program, we are headed towards thermonuclear confrontation. So it's a little more serious than the Second World War today. And so this was his program for China, for railroads. Next. This is what China has built today. I'll come back to this map later on, but you can see it's, maybe Sun Yat-sen's map was not so clear for you, but I can tell you that most of the proposals that Sun Yat-sen proposed in 1919 is what is being carried out today in China. Next. Here, what I'm going to do, give you just a very few slides to show you the growth, particularly since year 2000, of just a few indicators of Chinese economy. First, we have the world crude steel production. You look at the top, you can see that is the world steel production. Then you have the bottom. You can see China, 2000, you see that, China, India? You can see China there near 2000, and bang, it goes up. Okay, let's have the bottom. Here you have, a little bit higher up, Yep. Here you have China, see 2000, and comparison to India, but you can see that curve concerning raw steel production, the exponential rate of growth of production of raw steel. Next. Okay, different graph. Crude steel production. Look at the percentage of China in year 2000, 15.1. then you'd say 13 years later, it's almost half the world's production of world crude steel is being produced in China, at the bottom. And here you have the same picture. Next. The top. Whoops. Okay. Here we have, just look for the rapid growth of major industrial products. This is from 2000 to 2005. There is a 201 or 202% increase in rolled steel production in tons. So over 200% in 5 years growth. Units of cars, 361% growth. Cement, 77.5% growth. Air conditioners, I love that. In southern China, it's very hot, okay? You have a growth of 270%. And to the very right of personal computers, over 1,103% growth. And the bottom, China made what they are doing. They have made 5-year development plans, and then they corrected. Most of the time when they made 5-year development plans, they had gone over their goals. These goals, they said here, they all reached them. And you might think some of this is not so big. Gross domestic product went up in 5 years from 18.2 to 26.1. GDP per capita. Then you have urbanization. It's only 4%. But because of all the people in China, you're talking about 100 million people in 5 years were moved into cities, okay? And the same thing with forestation. They are very serious about reforestation. Next. Oh, yeah, just go back to the one we just had. One of the things that I want to, when you talk, so I just showed you a few indicators of the incredible exponential growth in steel, in cement, and so forth, in rolled steel. So what you have, it is with everything. Phil mentioned space, and I know we're going to get a presentation more of that later on. What China is doing is they're inviting all, through advertisements and scouts and so forth, they're inviting top scientists and young engineers and so forth from all over the world. You can go in on the internet and you can look, for example, farming, medical, engineering, and you can see what kind of jobs they prefer people below the age of 45, and then they say you can get 100 square meter apartment for free, you can get laboratory, you can get so and so many assistants, you can get this and this salary. Actually, for example, from Taiwan to mainland China, 70% of all the young people below the age of 30 wants to go and have a job in mainland China because China has better salary than Taiwan now, and they have more fringe benefits. And Taiwan used to be one of the Asian tigers. Now people want to go to mainland China to work. But what China specifically are seeking is the best talent in the world to come to China. I can give you an example. At the conference we just had in New York last Saturday, there was a Chinese professor from one of the New York universities, and she told about a friend of hers who were in San Diego, and then there was a person in mainland China, and within the same period of 14 days, they both made the same discovery concerning stem cells. Namely, that you can create mice out of the skin. You can then create mice. And immediately, the Chinese government offered $1 billion, the equivalent of $1 billion to the person in China who had discovered this. The lady in San Diego still hasn't seen a dime. So that shows a little bit of the difference concerning the emphasis on knowledge and the newest technologies. In 1980, you had 84% of the population in China was extremely poor. 84%, that is in 1980. Now in 2013, it is 10%. So these figures I showed you before concerning, and you know that used for construction, it's used for building railroads, building new cities, building dams, new harbors, you name it. And this is a very healthy growth curve. This is the kind of growth curve we can see for the entire world if we get a new financial system and a new system overall for the entire world. If we get the United States to join the BRICS effort, if we get the United States to accept Xi Jinping's offer, join this process. See, what is different is that the BRICS countries don't want to keep anybody out. They want everybody to join this effort for creating human living standards and a human way of life for every person in the world. That is what they want to have for a future for themselves and for the rest of the world. So let me just show you quickly just a few pictures of how it looks like. This is a new railway station in Shenzhen, next. And it is all kinds of people taking the railroads. 25% of all train passengers in China now travel with fast-speed rail. You can see this, they don't have fancy Gucci suitcases. Next. This is inside that railroad station, next. There's tons of people traveling. I can tell you, like, between Beijing and Shanghai, you have now, there is a 40% rate of increase per year in the amount of passengers. And the trains go every 4 to 5 minutes between Shanghai and Beijing. Between Shenzhen and Beijing, which is in the north, it's a 20% growth every year in passengers. So it's not just for the rich people, it's for overall. Next. Yeah, and here you have one of those fantastic trains that everybody should be traveling on all over the world, and that we are going to have in Africa and elsewhere, in Ibero-America and so forth, and along the west coast, because China really wants to build fast-speed rail they want to build the Bering Strait Tunnel, and they want to go across Alaska and Canada and all the way down, so we can get in no time to San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, and over to Russia if we wish. Okay, I had wanted to put this on the blackboard, so just listen to this, because this gives you the same rate of growth what I told you before. And you think about the United States and what we can do here. You think about Africa, you think about Asia as a whole, the world as a whole. What can be done if you have the proper economic policies, non-speculative use of value, and we invest in development. Year 2000, so stay with me, okay? Year 2000, let me ask you, how many miles of fast-speed rail did China have, you think, in year 2000? Just come with a guess.
0?
0. Yeah. Okay, I let it out of the bag, I guess. So year 2000, that's not so long time ago, right? 0 miles of fast-speed rail. Okay. Last year, 6,800 miles of fast-speed rail. By the end of next year, by the end of 2015, 11,000 miles of fast speed. That is almost a doubling for 2013. And by year 2020, just another 5 years, China's goal is to have 31,000 miles. That is more than a doubling, almost a tripling of what they intend to have by the end of 2015. In China, only in China, apart from all the fast-speed rail they intend to build in Ibero-America, in Africa, and elsewhere in Asia. That is a rate that is an accelerate. This is a healthy economic growth, okay? And it's not just rail, it's everything. It's science in farming, agriculture, medicine, space. It's being led by space. That's what we have. This went that fast in China. And what I think is the very best, because China was so poor, dirt poor. This is the very best example, optimistic example. It's real, that this can happen for the whole world, and it can happen very fast, because now we have a basis in China. We have Russia, India, and you take that together with the United States and Europe, where everything is geared towards development, that all minds work together for the development of the world. You have that rate for the world. That is where we have the new era of mankind. And it goes together, I mean, it's very similar on a world scale when Roosevelt at the war, when Pearl Harbor had been attacked, and he came and said, we have to build so many airplanes, we have to build so many ships, and people said, you're crazy, we can't do it. And the whole machinery of the United States economy was geared towards producing those airplanes and producing those ships, and we did it. China is doing this, building dams, railroads, new ports, reforestations, new cities, and so forth, and they're now allied with the BRICS. And the BRICS are, countries are inspiring each other and supporting each other, and that has meant that a number of other nations that are not directly members of the BRICS have now gotten the guts to stand up against the speculators in City of London and Wall Street, and are doing likewise. And I want to just take one last thing before I give it over to Debra, and that is, think about if Xi Jinping was the president of the United States, just for a second, what he would do for the United States. Just think about it. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a guy like Xi Jinping as president of the United States? But anyway, this is just, we have to get America to have its soul back. And that is one thing I wanted to, Helga mentioned it, and I just wanted to reiterate that again, that already beginning in 1982, Deng Xiaoping very much emphasized the resurrection of Confucius in China. What had been happening during the Cultural Revolution and Mao was that everything classical from the West and everything classical from China was wiped out as evil and as bad. So in that way, China's soul was taken away from it, in the same way that America's soul is very much buried. And so Deng Xiaoping started it, and this has been increasing inside China a revival of the ideas of Confucius. And if you remember the very first map I showed you, you had the Chinese characters, and they mean, they call Chen Xia Wei Gong, and it means for the world belongs to everybody. That is a general welfare principle for everybody, which is also embodied in the founding principles of the United States. The inalienable rights of man, as enshrined in the United States founding principle, is for everybody. And the same principles you have in Confucius in China, which is now being revived, which is absolutely crucial. Without that, it wouldn't function. So I will not talk about that more today. I'll give it over to Debra, and then we can have discussion later on. But buy the language reports, study it. This is our future. This is the path to the future, which is already ongoing. And get the petition going like crazy.
Okay. I just want to take a short time and look at the BRICS and the World Land Bridge from the perspective of a complete change in thinking. because, you know, it would be a mistake to look at, you know, the infrastructure projects and things are more prosperous and so forth. But what the BRICS have done as a collection of leaders in the world, what the BRICS nation have done, and I'm going to give a couple of very important examples on that, has created a complete revolution in thinking in those countries that are joining with the BRICS and taking part in this infrastructure development. And we haven't, in terms of the soul of the United States, I mean, the United States, we haven't thought this way since John Kennedy. I mean, when John Kennedy was president, the country was optimistic, and we really felt we were a good country. You know, that we led the world in science and technology. We wanted to eradicate poverty. We thought we could eradicate poverty. We really thought we were going to do these things in the world. And with the assassination of John Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy, boom, 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 you know, the United States sunk into the Vietnam War, which Kennedy was not going to put us into. And we have to get that soul back, and we can by joining the BRICS. And so I want to go through a couple of things in terms of countries that have made that kind of transformation to that. But before I do that, actually, no, I'll do that. I want to do that at the end. I want to read a short quote by John Kennedy, and this is an excerpt that was found, you know, after Kennedy died. You know, people were going through his papers, and they found an excerpt of something that might have been a speech that he was preparing, or maybe an article or something like that. But what Kennedy said is, if half the amounts spent for world armaments were diverted, we could in 1 year build a schoolhouse in every community in the world needing one. In another year, we could build all the highways and railways needed in all the countries of the world. In another year, we could build all the dams and waterways to make the world's deserts bloom and become fruitful. With a fraction of 1 year's expenditures, we could finance a forced draft program to produce teachers, doctors, hospitals, scientists, and all the skilled technicians needed to operate the new world. Why is this not done? Why does mankind sentence itself to the miseries of this world when it has the power to create a new and better world? Now, that is the way we used to think, and that is the way we can think again when we dump the Bushes and the Obamas and the, you know, and join the BRICS. So what I want to do is quickly look at a couple of, I think, really beautiful cases of nations who have made a total transformation in thinking over the past period by realigning themselves with the BRICS nations, especially the leadership of Russia and China, but other nations who are deeply closely collaborating with the BRICS, like Argentina. And I would like to start with a great case of that, and that's the nation of Bolivia. Now, Bolivia is a small country, and it's a very, very poor country. And the president of Bolivia, who recently won re-election, was president of Bolivia. He was the current president. He is, just a second, Morales, Evo Morales, and he got elected as the first Native American president, and he was a leader in the cocaine movements. He was like a trade union leader. He was a leader in the cocoa growers, and he became the president. And he got elected, and then he wasn't elected, and then he got elected again, and you know, he didn't turn out the way the bankers wanted it so much. He nationalized the railroads in the first year, and after his election, he wasn't supposed to do that. He then nationalized the oil companies, and the utility companies, and the oil fields. And he said, we have to use this to develop our nation. But it wasn't until some years later, especially more recently, when he increasingly started bringing Bolivia into a dialogue with China, especially. And this September, in a series of speeches, you had as Leni pointed out, you had the January meeting in Brazil of the BRICS, which was a consolidation of the BRICS nations and the BRICS International Development Bank. In particular, for South America, this represented a real political transformation because, and I'm not going to go into the story, but you can get that story on LaRouche, our website, which is that the vulture funds of Wall Street started attacking Argentina. And they started literally threatening to foreclose on the nation. I mean, they were threatening to, steal like ships and embassies and satellites. So they were going to come and confiscate everything. They said it was their money and they were going to take it. And because of the consolidation of the BRICS, Cristina Kirchner, the president of Argentina, was able to work closely with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, and joining the BRICS, and actually joining both security arrangements, that is financial security arrangements with them, but a whole new era in trade between Argentina, Russia, and China. And I mean, spectacular ideas of developing Argentina, and Argentina, which has a great tradition of nuclear sciences and the agriculture sciences, was able to have tremendous mutually beneficial trade between Argentina and Russia. And this sent shockwaves throughout South America, which has been victimized over and over again by the Wall Street and London bankers. And so it's coming out of this whole fight over the summer with the BRICS, the development banks, the fight around Argentina, that in September there was a conference that was held in Bolivia. And many scientists and nuclear scientists from Argentina were invited to speak. And there was a lot of youth that were brought into these conferences and so forth. And I wanted to give you a couple of the speech from, especially from the Vice President of Bolivia, Alvaro Garcia Linera. And this speech is really a very, very beautiful announcement of the new world that the United States could also decide to join. He says, "The use of and training in atomic energy is one of our obligations as a society and as a state. We have made that decision, and we are going to guide ourselves based on that decision. In the coming years, we will implement a program of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, with medical and agricultural goals, as the case may be, but we will have an elite, a core of brains, integrated with the world to networks who work in the atomic field, which will allow Bolivia to learn about and use this fire of the 21st century, atomic energy. Nuclear energy is the fire of the 20th and 21st centuries. It is the fire which our ancestors had 20,000 years ago, which allowed them to make philosophy, technological science, culture, agriculture. Knowledge of the atom, its regularities, its uses, its functioning is the touchstone of the 20th and 21st centuries. The fundamental core of new knowledge and new technologies, new theories, and new means of production. Bolivia cannot remain on the periphery. If this is the case, and if the knowledge of the atom is secured. This knowledge is the sacred fire of the 20th and 21st centuries, as fire was for the pre-agriculture civilizations of 20,000 years ago. Today, a society which is respected, and we respect ourselves, cannot remain on the periphery, and we are not going to remain on the periphery. Fire in itself is not the destroyer, and nuclear energy is not the destroyer. It can be a creative force of life or a destructive force. Nuclear energy exists independently of us. It functions in nature, in the human body, in physical and chemical processes. The question is, if we have the ability as society to learn it, to know it, and to respect its force, and to know how to use it collectively and humanly for beneficial purposes. Let us break the mental and colonial chains, break them. Let us dare to leave the cave, as our ancestors did 20,000 years ago. Let us dare to assume our responsibility before the world, before our history and our society. Knowledge of nuclear energy is knowledge of the ABCs of nature. Bolivia has the technical, scientific, and moral obligation to take responsibility for the knowledge, use, and understanding, and beneficial development of this fundamental force of nature. It doesn't matter how long it takes, we're going to do it, because we're convinced that is how we will cement the conditions for the technological development of Bolivians for the next 400 to 500 years. So that is, I mean, Bolivia is, I don't know the population of Bolivia, but I know it's a very small country and it's a very poor country. You know, and this is exactly the kind of transformation that has been able to be created in a small country because they decided to shift. You know, and of course, you might remember that Evo Morales, besides being a target of George Soros and democracy organizations, all of a sudden they decided he wasn't a very democratic president, and maybe, you know, they should start revving people up against him. But he was also attacked a year and some months ago, if you remember. He had been in Russia meeting with Vladimir Putin. This is the summer a year ago. Because these whole ideas, because Russia will play a part in the development of nuclear energy, China will play a part, they're developing steel industry and so forth. And he was coming back from Moscow, and he was to refuel, the plane was to refuel in Portugal, and he was denied airspace over France. And the plane was forced to land in Austria and held for 9 hours. Now, why did that happen? Because Obama wanted his plane searched because said that he was hiding Ed Snowden on his airplane. Remember that? Yeah? And believe me, this has not been forgotten at all. So, so this is, anyway, this is, I wanted to give that as a very important example of this. And I also, they are setting up science universities. They're setting up immense cooperation with other countries as well. They're developing technological institutes, and, you know, I mean, they're basically saying to the youth, you know, actually I wanted, which is one more important quote here. If students do their part in study, our fatherland will be great. The wealth of a nation has two names, production and education. If we produce and study, we are strong. This is, again, the Vice President, Garcia Linera. He said, don't let us down. This was to a big youth concert. Bolivia needs the best. We are tired of being last. President Evo's goal is Bolivia is an industrial, productive, and energy center for all of Latin America, and we're going to do that because our students will study. So, and I wanted to also briefly now look at another revolutionary change going on in the great nation of Egypt. let's see. Okay, there's a land bridge. The great nation of Egypt, and just to give a little bit of background on this. Okay, good, I'll discuss that in a minute. Is that Egypt, for the past decades, has been completely controlled by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization. The country was dominated by Wall Street and the City of London bankers. They were increasingly forced into cash crops like cotton, which sucks out tons of water, and the country was getting poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer. And in the course of the so-called Arab Springs, horrible youth unemployment. In the course of these Arab Springs, which spread to Egypt, you had more and more of these angry youth trying to get out Mubarak and, wanting change, but of course not really knowing what change and how to do it. And like in many of these countries, this Arab Spring got co-opted by the Obama administration, the British, the Saudis, by the Muslim Brotherhood. And so what happened is you had a genuine revolt going on. At the same time, you had the Muslim Brotherhood getting in there, again, recruiting poverty-stricken, desperate youth. And Mubarak was overthrown, but what came into power with the help of Obama was something unthinkable, which is that the Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt. And that is unthinkable. I mean, this is the organization that attempted assassinations against the great father of modern Egypt, not Nasser. You're going to make him the head of Egypt? It's unthinkable. So what happened after a period of time when the country was becoming, more and more dictatorial, and I can assure you that Obama, the United States was blamed for this by many Egyptians. The population rose up together with patriots in the military, and they threw Morsi out of there. And what came to power as one of the generals of the military, who's now the president of Egypt, President al-Sisi. And I think nothing could be more clear as to what the direction of Egypt is right now, because when Obama held an African summit in July in the United States, President al-Sisi was supposed to come and be part of this African summit. And it was a horrible summit. It was, I don't want to go into the details of it, but needless to say, President al-Sisi did not come to the United States. He jilted Obama, and he flew to Moscow, and he had meetings with Putin to set the course of what we're about to look at very briefly. And I just want to actually, before I go into it, this is a map of which shows the demography of Egypt. 87 million people live on only 5.3% of the land of Egypt. 60-something% of Egypt is desert. And so they're clustered. They live around the Nile, and they live around the Suez Canal. In real poverty. Now, Mubarak, had this kind of plan where, a certain amount of acreage was going to be given for agriculture, but instead of the Egyptian nation developing this land was bought up for development by what? By Saudi princes and, the wealthy of the Arab world, and they didn't develop it at all. But now all of that is going to change, and maybe, the next one, okay. I looked at you, I think you were going to win. This is extraordinary. Number one is, and we'll discuss this in a minute, is what al-Sisi announced, and is the development of a second Panama Canal, of Suez Canal, And in some cases, it's a widening of the canal, and in some cases, it's a parallel canal. Because...
Is it possible to make the map bigger?
Yeah.
You can't really be there.
Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, and this announcement of this project, which is not that it hasn't been discussed for decades, of course, the Suez Canal, like the Panama Canal, is grossly inadequate for the shipping in the world. China is the main user of the Suez Canal, and it's a one-way street. And so with President El-Sisi's collaboration with the BRICS, with China, and with Russia, this project is now underway, way underway. But what is important to understand, in particular, about this transformation of this nation of Egypt, which has been suppressed for so long by the bankers of London and Wall Street, the IMF and the World Bank, is that the project is going to be wholly financed by the Egyptians. They will not borrow, no foreign money will be borrowed. There will be no foreign aid to build this canal. They are also using Egyptian engineers, Egyptian companies, and just Egyptian labor. There's been calls throughout the country of unemployed youth come and develop this, which is going on. And I wanted to find one thing I have on it. Oh, here it is. Now, what they did to finance this canal, is that they sold bonds, state bonds to finance the canal. And the bonds were going to have a non-tradable 5-year certificates, 12% interest rates. You had to be Egyptian to buy the bonds. No foreigners were going to buy these bonds. And in fact, Egyptians outside of Egypt, of course, could qualify to buy these bonds. And what's really amazing is that the money that was needed to start building this canal was raised in 8 days. The excitement about the population taking their money out of their mattresses and their floorboards, and people Egyptians from all over the world and all over the country bought these bonds at such a record rate that the project is now well underway. And we'll look at that in a minute. But along with the canal is development corridors. And these are development corridors that go north-south down the Nile and also along the coastline. And hooked into these development corridors are the next one. Yeah, oh, that's not that easy to see, but, okay. But you have canals and highways and roads that are connected to this north-south corridor, which is going to open up the desert, for example, the lake at the Aswan Dam. The water is going to be pumped into the desert to start opening up agriculture. And getting back to the land, what El-Sisi has announced is that this land has been taken from these rich Saudi princes and so forth. And this land will be given in parcels free, like Abraham Lincoln's Homestead Act, free to unemployed college graduates to actually open up this land and greatly expand the arable land in Egypt. And they're going to keep doing this and doing this. I don't have the figures right now. I don't want to look them up, but it's stupendous how they plan on expanding arable land in Egypt in order to become food self-sufficient. And just the next one, yeah. Okay, I keep pointing here. This is tremendous too, because this is the plowing that is going on in this canal. This is an actual picture of it. It's not a painting or anything like that. As well as the pumping stations for water as well, to start moving the waters into the desert areas. So I mean, this is a tremendous transformation. President El-Sisi was just in China, you know, consolidating this investment and these investments. And what is really something is that the thinking on the part of President El-Sisi, as well as China and Russia, is that the new Suez Canal and Egypt as becoming a real radiating center of science. They actually have a science city which they are going to develop more in Egypt. Russia's going to work on building a nuclear power plant, the first nuclear power plant in Egypt. And the idea of this great nation becoming a radiating factor for Africa, with the Suez Canal being an entree point for the massive amount of Chinese trade that is expected into Africa as well, which the Chinese have started, but it's small compared to what it needs and what it will be. And the other thing is also the idea in mind that these wars are going to stop, and there is going to be peace between Israel and Palestine, and because they're actually going to open up a highway, you know, development corridor into the Gaza. And you know, and start the cooperation and development there. And the optimism of this idea that these wars are not going to last. These wars are not going to last, and we are going to be the opening point for economic development. I mean, what a transformation, you know, from 2 years ago or a year ago. What an incredible transformation of a country now leading in economic development and out of the whole colonial control. And that's exactly what we have to do to this country. Well, I just want to say two things. One is, I wanted to read just something very quickly, which is Xi Jinping's invitation to Obama and the United States to join with them. So you get an idea of this, and let me just find it here. Now, this was a press conference with Obama at one podium and Xi Jinping at the other podium at the APEC summit a couple of months ago. And Xi Jinping said, "The Pacific Ocean is broad enough to accommodate the development of both China and the United States, and our two countries to work together to contribute to security in Asia. These are mutually complementary efforts instead of mutually exclusive ones. I also introduced to President Obama China's initiatives of establishing the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and Silk Road Fund. Underdeveloped infrastructure is the main bottleneck obstructing the economic development in Asia. China has initiated the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in order to offer support and facility to regional infrastructure development. These proposals and initiatives are open and inclusive in Asia. They are not exclusive. We welcome the active participation of the United States and other relevant countries so that together we can promote and share prosperity and peace in Asia Pacific. China is ready to work with the United States to make efforts in a number of priority areas and putting into effect such principles as non-confrontation, non-conflict, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation. And with unwavering spirit and unremitting efforts, we will promote new progress in building a new type model of major country relations between two countries, so as to bring greater benefits to our two peoples and our two countries. Now, if the American population had any idea that we could have this, you know, quickly, what would they choose? You know, financial crash, potentially nuclear war, endless warfare, or joining with the BRICS. So I would propose, with Leni's proposal, to go to all, or Phil's proposal to go to your Christmas parties or whatever you plan on doing.
New Year's parties.
New Year's parties.
Wild.
Family meetings. Who knows? Maybe your congressman is going to have a town hall meeting and you can really smash them. You should go with the pamphlet. You know, these pamphlets, for $200, you'll have 10 of them. You know, you could buy 5 of them, 10 of them. Get these pamphlets. The quote that I just read you of Xi Jinping is on the front. And this is, you can get this, it's got maps, it's got a tremendous picture. It talks about Alexander Hamilton credit system, fusion energy. It's really this is what people need this Christmas. They really need this. They don't need, you know, Black Friday or Saturday, whatever. Endless shopping, a new iPhone, a new widespread, a television screen that's so big you have to build a new house, you know. They don't need this, all right? And so I would urge people to, we have, you know, people can buy these in bulk. We have them today. And to order your land bridge report so you're really qualified so that you not just learn about Egypt, you learn about Bolivia and China, you learn about every part of the entire world is in this report. And it's $250. You can order it today from Executive Intelligence Review. So, you know, I would just say, wouldn't it be, you know, they really look happy. These BRICS countries, they look happy because they're creating a totally new world, and we've got to join that world and get that smile on Americans' faces. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to slightly change the schedule because we have some people out of that. We're going to get over computer hookup on because the second part of the day is going to focus on, in a certain sense, a deeper sense of the ideas. The science driver, we have Leona, Chang from the science group in the basement, and we have Dennis Speed, I think, in New York, on the specific organizing project that Lyndon LaRouche has orchestrated. And it's around this, the idea of Hamiltonian politics and economics. I'm not going to go into that in much detail. As I said, the only thing I would say is the United States is a United States. It's not a bunch of states. It's a union. But I'll leave that to the others. Now, is it going to take you a few minutes? Then we'll have the music section by Mindy afterwards. A few minutes? Okay, why don't we do two things? If there's any questions, we'll take them, and then we'll take a 5-minute break so people can, you know, stretch a little bit or whatever they have to do. Yeah, Sean? Yeah.
And by the language report, you have time for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sign, yeah, go ahead. Whatever you have to do, I don't know. I'm not an expert here.
Okay.
Here, okay.
So, this comment and question for the present U.S. economic situation indicates the following figures. Domestic and international debt is 18 trillion, which is 102% against the GDP. Trade deficit 3/4 trillion. Budget deficit 400 billion. Unemployment 12 million. Homeless 600,000. How can we overcome this situation? How many years going to take to overcome this situation? Is there any way that BRICS nation can help on this issue?
Okay, well, some of these will be a longer story, but look, this is monetarism. A good deal of the debt, the 18 trillion, which is a problem, is fictitious paper. It's speculation on speculation on speculation. We would have to go through an audit of the U.S. federal debt to find out how much of this really represents investment in physical production beneficial activity and how much was pure speculation. For example, the cost of issuing bonds. And in some of these cases, you're going to find out that these bonds were issued to cover bailouts of banks that does not fall under, should not fall under what's covered by the FDIC or the government or anything else. For example, the Federal Reserve has a book balance of $5 trillion. It used to have next to nothing. Now, there are technical features, that's not really part of the U.S. debt, but you get an idea of how much speculative debt has been piled up in the economy that feeds back into the cost of what the United States does. But the broader question on this is, this is the whole point of Hamiltonian credit system that people have a hard time understanding, okay? Because they're so used to money. And the idea of money is that, well, I have a financial instrument, it's got a value. Now, my whole purpose in life is to make the value of that financial instrument increase in monetary terms. It doesn't reflect necessarily anything going on in the economy. You know, today people think that, you know, commodity prices are going to go up, so they invest in a derivative on the commodity price, and they think that derivative will go up in value because other people are going to buy it. Now, this doesn't mean a single commodity is produced. Now, basing an economy on the way in which money flows in that sense is going to loot the economy. It's going to destroy the physical economy. Because indeed, you're going to have to reduce the cost of the actual physical economy to reflect the increase in the financial value. Now, credit is issued, first of all, on a same basis. In other words, you don't expect 20% returns overnight, or even a 10% return overnight. You know that a 7 or 8% return per annum is excellent for any physically productive activity. So you issue centralized credit from the federal system, which is the national bank that Hamilton proposed. And on the basis of that, certain central projects are developed, which then other people can take part in various ways. So there's a growth in the actual product in the economy, the living standard of the population, the scientific activity, and that represents the expanded value in the credit. So that money is controlled by credit, which is based on physically productive activity. If we did that in the United States, you could deal with rolling over the debt over a period. That's what Hamilton did when he came in. He took the U.S. debt. He said, interestingly enough, he said, we will take responsibility for the state debt, because the states went into debt during the Revolutionary War. There was no federal government. And then you had the Articles of Confederation, which stunk, because there was no unified federal government. This country was based on overcoming a states' rights system. Even though today we have this Confederate outlook that we're all a bunch of Confederates and believe in state rights. Okay? So, what did he do? He took the debt of the states and the federal debt and said, we're going to honor our debt. But what we're going to do is we're going to turn your debt into slightly longer term bonds at a relatively decent interest rate, and you're going to use those bonds. Those bonds are going to be the basis of our expansion of the infrastructure in the United States, which is going to make the United States, the original 13 colonies, put it on the track of industrial development. And that's where we came from. So we could do essentially, in principle, the same thing today. The same thing came up in the Civil War. Lincoln, this shows you where the New York bankers were. New York bankers were heavily into the cotton trade and this London-based other form of commodity speculation, as well as drugs out of Boston. The Cabot family and so on and so forth. So he went to Wall Street, he said, we need money to run the war against the Confederacy. And they said, no. We're not going to back it up, it's going to hurt our investments. We don't want to do this, we're not sure you're going to win. So they did nothing. And Lincoln, being something of an interesting character, took a guy who was one of his greatest competitors, Salmon Chase, who was, you know, an abolitionist who was against Lincoln in many ways. And however, he basically told Chase to come up with a plan, and they came up with the greenback policy. And we united, we didn't have a united currency at that time. They created the US currency, called the greenback at the time. And we issued federal-based credit, and that's how we ran the Civil War. So we've done it, without going into a lot of detail, Roosevelt did something very similar. He circumvented the Federal Reserve because he couldn't quite get rid of it. And he created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the Home Owners Lending Corporation, and on and on. And they found ways to issue federally backed credit. And that's how we won World War II. We didn't solve the economy by going into the war. We won the war by restarting an industrial economy. So, is there anybody else? Because we have to hurry up here a little bit. Yeah.
Should I come up here?
I guess so.
Okay. I'm so encouraged by your presentation on Egypt and those charts that you showed of the growth in China. On Egypt, I got a phone call a couple years ago from a friend in Egypt who said, my country is in shambles and all hope is lost. And that was just 2 years ago. So this is very, very encouraging. And I have two questions. The first one, those charts are terrific. And I just wish that there were a whole classroom of junior high and high school kids here that could see those charts. And once America joins the BRICS, those charts are going to be in the textbooks. I'm sure of that. The question I have is, are there charts that we can look at that will show the growth of America and increase in productivity during the time in the 1800s that we were using the Hamiltonian, John Quincy Adams methods that were allowing for this growth. Of course, the growth was stunted by the Jackson era, we know that, but show the comparison of the rise and the drop, the corresponding rise and drop, when we were doing it the proper way and then when we weren't doing it the proper way. It'd be very helpful.
That's a great question.
And then my other question, do you want to answer that first and I'll ask the other one? Or? Okay. The other question, the Caribbean area I think is very important, and I think that we should waste no time in inviting and including countries like Cuba and Haiti, for sure, to lift them out of their poverty, in South America, Ecuador, Venezuela. And my question about that is, what is your take on what the Obama administration is doing right now with Cuba? I like the exchange of the prisoners. I think it's finally time that all the Cuban 5 were liberated. But I distrust Obama and this normalizing of relations. I think there's some trick up the sleeve there to bring them back into the empire. So I think that's a red alert there. That's why I think we should go make friends with Cuba and bring them into the BRICS arrangement. But I'd like to hear your take on that.
Well, just we're going to have to be quick because, you know, two things. I mean, on the charts, look, we have a lot of material from the basement that's available. You just have to find out how to get on the website and different publications that we have, and we can pull them together. We do have stuff on the 19th century, the collapse, and so on and so forth. On Cuba, look, I would rather simple. I mean, it's okay. Look, I happen to know directly. This is what the Cubans wanted. Okay, they wanted recognition, and if they're going to get it, I have a certain confidence at a certain level that, you know, Castro knows what he's doing. They're not going to fool him. Fidel, Raul, they have problems. I'm not endorsing everything that they do, but obviously
opening it up is the best thing. And if they're not too worried about being sucked into, you know, whatever, I'll go with that for the time being. Okay?
Now, otherwise, we do have people on, so I want to just give people a strict 5 minutes to stretch your legs, and then we'll get Lynn and Dennis Speed from New York. Okay? 5 minutes, that means 3:34. This was, of course, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the last movement, to Schiller's text, and it doesn't really pay respect neither to Beethoven or to Schiller to bring such a short excerpt. Beethoven used the entire symphony, all the movements coming before the last movement, to build up for the human voices coming in the last movement, singing everyone here to get a copy of, to order a copy of. We are out of copies you can actually get back with you today, I think, but order it and study it, because this is the future of mankind. This is the future of your children and your grandchildren. I want to say also in this, Phil mentioned the petition that the United States has been invited by Xi Jinping to join this new era of mankind. The United States has almost lost its soul. China lost its soul during the Cultural Revolution. It went against Confucius, all the key ideas of China, and they have revived that, and I'll give a pretty concise, I hope, picture of what is happening now from a little different angle. And the United States can do exactly the same thing. One of the things I think is so exciting about this process is how fast it can go, and that it can be done anywhere in the world, because China was very, very poor when they started after the Cultural Revolution, which lasted between 1966 and 1977. And then China began to take off, and I think I'll show that to you here today. So let's take the next. So here we have very happy leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And Helga mentioned it. I mean, it is clearly, this process has been led by China, which I'll show why and how in a second. And Helga mentioned the very crucial how all these funds has been established since the July the 16th this year, just in a very few months. That is credit to be directed towards in-depth, in way to get rid of Ebola, to get rid of terrorism, is in-depth economic development. And just yesterday, India and Russia, well, not India, China and Russia were discussing
how to develop Afghanistan in depth now that the US troops are pulling out, and you have Taliban coming back, and you have all kind of growth of terrorism possible because people are poor and the whole place is flooded in drugs. Then what do? The key thing you do is to engage that country in in-depth development with railroads, with universities, hospitals, and so forth. So let's go on. I want to show number 3. Yes. Just to give people a little picture because now I'm going to go through what China has been doing. China and US, apart if you don't count Alaska, are quite similar. If you look at one, this is the elevation of US and China. They're more or less the same size. The only difference is that China has a whole landmass to the west of it. But China's geography is a little bit more rough than the United States. The mountains are much more and they're much taller. Take the next. This is the water situation in the US and in China. China is doing, and that's similar. China is doing gigantic water projects for taking water from the south where you have a lot of water up to the north. And you know the gigantic problems we have here in California and east of California and south of California with water problems. US joining the BRICS development perspective will mean we will have good friends to collaborating to green the desert here in the United States and elsewhere, infrastructure development. The gentleman from Africa mentioned the question about economy and Ebola. The Premier Li from China went to Africa this year, and he proposed to connect all of Africa's capital with fast-speed rail. This can happen, and this can happen very fast. The key thing is we need to get the United States on board. And therefore, I would like to ask you now, before I go on, to be crazy, go wild. In all your Christmas parties and so forth, where you now go out with a petition and get people to sign. Younger people that are good with the internet, go in and do some research, send this petition out, get it on websites. We have to create an uproar and get US to get its soul back and join the rest of mankind so that this will become a reality. The opposite is confrontation. There's no way that such two systems can exist side by side, and Phil went through, and Helga, the danger of nuclear confrontation. I want to take, can you go back to this picture? Because one of the things too with, apart from what Phil said concerning going after Russia now, is if you look at the map, if you look at from Asia over to Europe, vast majority there is Russia. Russia being rich in minerals and potential. If you take an in-depth development of Russia with infrastructure development, with development corridors and so forth, that is a crucial, the crucial part of the world land bridge. And the financial oligarchy wants to crush that by all means to make sure that this will not function. And the key word praise of mankind. And in the text of Schiller, it says, "Alle Menschen werden Brüder." All people becomes like brothers. And seid umschlungen Millionen, embrace ye millions. And that is the, and you have the opening, Freude schöner Götterfunken, joy, beautiful godly sparks. So this image from Schiller and Beethoven, I think best gives an idea about the new era of mankind that has been opened up by these initiatives led by China, by Xi Jinping and the other BRICS countries. Namely that this is one humankind, and to collaborate with each other for securing the utmost development of every single individual existing today and to come in the future. The praise of beautiful godly sparks, which is the creativity of man. And this new era is right here. It's being built right now. We have now a choice between two systems. And this system is for the future of mankind. And this is something that really has been the work of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche and this organization. This is our baby. And we had the old language report that we published the 1st of January 1997, and we organized hundreds of conferences and meetings, individuals meetings, and with large groups of people all over the world. And now, so many years later, we have, as Phil showed, the new language report, which I'll encourage everyone